Thank you, Don. I want to pick up really where that reading leads off of an open heart. And I'll open my heart a little bit to you. I've had a tough couple of weeks. Oh, I expected a little bit of a response then. Perhaps I need to tell you of some of my troubles and trials. I can't hear very well. I'm really sympathizing with those of you who have hearing problems. I've got something going on here. I also can't see very well at the moment because sitting in the church last Sunday morning, the 9:30 communion, I was just cleaning my glasses and they fell apart. The lens came out, the frame's broken. I've had to go to the opticians and have my eyes tested again and buy some new glasses. Now I'm waiting for them. So it's either wearing these Boots reading glasses where I can see my notes, but I can't see you, or I can put on the sunglasses. Now I can see you, and you can't see me. But I can't read my notes. So we'll try and get there. Oh, and the other thing is, I'm not finished yet. I've had car trouble. You wouldn't believe it. Driving the car, the steering doesn't feel right. And for me, there's a couple of things are essential with a car. One is when I press the brake, it'll stop. If that's not working, it goes to the garage. The other thing is if it's steering, if you turn the steering wheel and nothing happens, I'm a bit worried. So I sent it to the dealer. And the dealer phoned me up and said, we found the problem, Mr. Dallison, and it will cost you X amount to put it right. My heart stopped beating. It was that much. And I said, okay, have to have it done, go ahead. I picked it up, and the steering was not right. So I took it back, and they contacted me to say it's going to cost you another arm and a leg. I said, you're joking. Okay, do it. So I went and got it, picked it up, drove it the next day, and the steering is not fixed. I thought, that's it. I took it to a local garage and told them my sorry story. I got much more response from them than I have from you this morning. Really. And I said, can you fix it? And they said, well, we'll look at it for you. I gave them the details of what the previous garage had done, and they fell about laughing. And then they said, we'll put a bit of WD-40 on it, and a bit of grease. Do you know, it drove like a dream. Are you telling me that I didn't need all that? Well, most of it. Didn't really need it. So I went back to the first garage, and I poured my heart out to them. Thank you, you're getting there. Did I get an apology? No. Did I get the offer of some money back? No. And when I got home, my wife said, oh, I've just been watching Rip Off Britain. And it's all about people who take their cars to the dealership and get ripped off. I said, yes, I know all about it. Now you know just a little of the trials and tribulations of Graham Dallison. I'm not going to say any more, because I'm not here to speak about myself, as indeed Paul was very reticent to speak about himself. He didn't like doing that. He wanted to open his heart to the people of Corinth because there was a particular problem. He was much more comfortable with preaching Jesus Christ, never boasting about himself, never telling anything of all the experiences he's been through, but rather just opening his heart to them now. He tells them a number of interesting things. First of all, he tells them he has the heart of an evangelist. Now, I find that interesting because he's writing to a church that he founded with God's leading and by the power of the Holy Spirit in Corinth. Now, he hadn't been to the church for a while, and he'd written to them. Certainly, we have 1 Corinthians. There may well have been another letter before he writes 2 Corinthians. And it seems like certain people are saying, have you noticed that when Paul writes to you, he's not very nice to you. But when he's with you, he's a different man altogether. Paul says earlier in 2 Corinthians, in chapter 2, verse 4, I wrote to you, that may be 1 Corinthians, or it may be this missing letter that we talk about. I wrote to you out of great distress and anguish of heart, and with many tears, not to grieve you, but to let you know the depth of my love to you. He finds it difficult sometimes to put a pen to paper and to write. He finds it difficult sometimes to speak to people, to open up his heart. I'm going to guess that 99% of you feel exactly the same way. You don't really open up your heart very much at all. Would I be right? My wife and I are like that. We can be in a restaurant having a meal, and we're talking about the food that's in front of us. Is your fish all right, dear? Yeah, it's okay. And I'll tell her about my meal. So we mention the things that are not quite right. And then the waitress comes along. And you know what she says, don't you? Is everything all right? Yes, fine, thank you very much. You see, we're British. That's how we are. And Paul opens his heart. What does he tell us? Well, he tells us, first of all, he's the heart of an evangelist. An evangelist really has the desire to see people come to Christ. He wants to share faith and instill faith in them, that their lives may be changed. That might be through public preaching. It might be more in personal conversation. If I ask you to think of an evangelist and public preaching, I would guess most of you will immediately think of Billy Graham. But there are many people who have the gift of evangelism, but it's more on a one-to-one basis. In the New Testament, that's how Philip began as an evangelist. But they are really speaking to mankind's deepest need. And that is that we have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, I want you to notice, this is so important this morning, Paul does not assume that everyone in the church is saved. So therefore, I don't want to take the assumption this morning that every single one of you are saved. You may have been coming to this church longer than I have. You may have heard more sermons than I have. But I ask you still this morning, are you saved? Are you sure that you are saved? Has God forgiven you for your sin? I wonder how you answer that question. Over the years, I've found that people answer it in different ways. If you say, are you a Christian? They'll say, I'd like to think so. Or I'm doing my best. Friends, there's only one answer really, or two answers, to are you a Christian? It's either yes or it's no. If I ask you a slightly different question, the answer is yes or it's no. The question is, are you married? Now, you'd never answer that, well, I'd like to think so. Well, I'm doing my best. Your wife might feel that, but You're either married or you're not married. Friends, it's true, you are either saved or you are not saved. And it's got nothing to do with how many times have you been to church. It's got to do with, have you responded to Jesus Christ and his offer of forgiveness in that he died upon the cross for you? Have you done that? And if you have, then you know that you are saved. Not because you're a good person. I look at you all and you look so good, it's amazing. But you are saved because God has forgiven you in Jesus. You will sense too that I have the heart of an evangelist. I want to make sure that people who are listening know what it really means to be saved. So Paul says to them, now is the day of salvation. If you are not sure, please, I beg with you, do not put it off. Do not say, well, I'm still thinking about it. And I think one day I will do it. No, I'm asking you. God is asking you now. Commit your life to him. Accept the forgiveness of your sin through Jesus' death upon the cross. So the heart of an evangelist, but he also has the heart of a pastor. Now, a pastor is a slightly different thing, but I don't believe that the two things are exclusive of one another. One of the last bits of writing that we have from the Apostle Paul is to Timothy. In 2 Timothy, he says to this young pastor, do the work of an evangelist. So he's a pastor, but Paul is saying also do the work of an evangelist. A pastor is one who looks to care for God's flock, for the sheep. They need to be kept well fed and watered. You'll see that I'm not struggling with that. My wife looks after that very well. But Christian people need to be fed on the Word of God and encouraged to grow. And again, an evangelist is not only looking to get converts, but to make disciples, people who will grow in Christ. He's also wanting, as a good pastor, to make sure that they are kept healthy. You may remember in Psalm 23, when David, as a shepherd, talks about the Lord is my shepherd. He says at one point, he anoints my head with oil. Much of my ministry has been in very rural situations. In one place, we were living next door was a field with sheep in it, and you'd see the sheep trying to push their way through very thick and coarse hedges, without a doubt getting quite deep scratches and cuts on their head. Now, a good shepherd would look for that, and he would put oil on it for healing. Sometimes our pastor may see that we as a church, or even as individuals, need to be cared for to be more healthy. The other thing that the shepherd will do is sometimes just to fend off the wolves. Let me very briefly read to you from 1 Samuel and chapter 17. It's where we have the story of David and Goliath. Saul, the king, who should have been the one to go and fight Goliath, really just looks at David in disdain, to think this little lad, how on earth can he cope against this giant of a man? Listen to what David says in reply. 1 Samuel 17 and verse 34. Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock. I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. I think that's a great reading. But it shows the heart, you see, of a good shepherd, a good pastor. At times, he must fend off those that are causing danger. And certainly, Paul had to put himself in very dangerous situations at times. I was listening to the car radio years ago now, and it was giving you the list of people who have stressful jobs. And they said one of the lists for occupations right down at the bottom, hardly any stress at all, is being a Christian minister or vicar or pastor. I thought, I'd love to meet you and wring your neck to show you that there is stress in this job. Well, now, Paul is willing to face that stress and to open up his heart to these people that he's been caring for, and he opens up by telling them all the things that he's been through for their sake and for others. Verse 4, troubles, hardships, distresses. Could have stopped there, but he decides to go on. He talks about beatings, imprisonment, riots, hard work, sleepless nights, hunger. And then he adds that there is some good sides too. Some wonderful experiences in being a pastor and for caring for you as Christian people. He opens his heart to them fully to show them that his love for them is real. Now he asks them, I've opened up my heart to you. Will you please open your heart to me? Because from all that I'm hearing about you is you're standing off from me and you're denying my apostleship. You're not recognizing the God-given gift that God has given to me. And you're talking about me in ways that, well, I'm surprised at, because you've known me for a long time. Do you really think that now I could be like this among you? What you're hearing these other people say about me, I'm surprised and I'm hurt. And I'll be honest with you, being in Christian ministry can be a very painful place. So he asks that they open their hearts to him. He wants a two-way relationship. And he's looking for them to give their hearts to him. Friends, I've heard you doing this. I know that you do it, and I want to encourage you. It is great to say to the preacher afterwards, wow, that was a good sermon this morning. Thank you. I've heard you say that, and it's great. I really want to encourage you to keep doing that. Please don't do what I'm going to ask now, because that will be embarrassing. But there's been occasions where in the past people have said to me, not just that was a great sermon this morning, but they said, I'm going to go home today and I'm going to read the whole of the book of Isaiah. I just preached on a couple of verses from Isaiah. Friends, that's real encouragement. Because it's not just, I found that interesting and stimulating. It's saying to the preacher, that's going to change my life. I'm going to do something different. And I think really, and I say this because we are British people, very reserved, we need to open up a little bit more. But probably to do that in a sensible way. I've always found that in our small groups, house groups, Bible study groups, it's a much better way of doing it than in a whole church situation. So you've got a smaller group that you can begin to get to know, have confidence with, and begin to trust, and that you are honest with them and open up your heart. Friends, you'll find something quite an elation. Did you realize that word is in relationship? Elation. Absolute joy. When somebody begins to open up as a Christian believer, it may be wanting to share their problems, or it may be wanting to share their joys. To open up our hearts to one another. I believe that Wesley had it right in founding the Methodist Church, to put people in small groups and to give them responsibility to care for one another. You, each one of you, are shepherding the rest of this little group. And you've got to ask them, how are you getting on? How have you lived since we studied together last? Because we need to see our own hearts. Are they healthy? Our hearts towards Jesus. Do we know that our sin is forgiven? Our hearts towards one another. Are they open? I'm going to finish with a verse from John's first epistle. He says this, because I think if we begin to really open up our hearts, we're not going to be so happy with what we really find there. But listen to this. This is how we know that we belong to the truth, and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence. If our hearts condemn us, we know that God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. Why not open your heart to God? He knows everything anyway. You cannot tell him anything that you've ever done, thought, or said that he doesn't already know. But just opening your heart means you can find forgiveness. Open your hearts to God and open your hearts to one another. Amen.